Hello. In the last tarot video we had talked about the Chariot and how the Chariot was the beginning of the second tier of the major arcana cards. And it was the beginning of the path of adepthood. That the first cards leading up to the Chariot are the cards that talk about the initiatory process of when you are stepping into the temple, when you are beginning on the path. And that the cards that begin with the Chariot are the cards that talk about the second stage, the stage of one who has already attained a certain level of practice and of discipline and of understanding and what they have to do. So the following card after the Chariot is the card called Justice. Sometimes in some decks it's called Adjustment, and I think it could also be called Balance. It's a card about reaching and establishing that state of adepthood, of achievement in the Chariot, and about how to maintain in that state, what you have to do once you've achieved that state to then be able to take that next step forward. So the image in the deck I've been using of the Justice card, like in many tarot decks, shows a feminine figure. Here it shows just a face, right? And it shows the group of people looking upwards towards the figure of Justice. And the figure of Justice has scales on either side. And in the center, coming directly down the center of the face, is a sword. So this represents that there are these two weights on either side. And in the middle, there is the sword which keeps the balance. Now the sword is the mind. The sword is the intellectual faculty of the suit of swords. And so here it is the balanced mind which keeps the state of balance between the two extremes. Behind the scales, you see there are also the columns, those same columns that you saw in many of the earlier cards. So this is a card about maintaining that balance by maintaining the middle and by creating the correct reflection and perspective between the extremes of life, the inner and the outer, the higher and the lower, the different elements, keeping everything in that state of focus so that then the product is this, on the top of the head you see here it's the pomegranate bursting out its seeds, its bounty, which in turn feed the two sides of the column. They flow down through the center, so it creates this, it has this natural imagery of a kind of cycle. And people can be in cycles of momentum where they're moving forward, or they can be in cycles of stagnancy where they're losing ground and shutting down and getting smaller and smaller, right? Or getting bigger and bigger. The idea of the balance card then is that if you are maintaining a good balance in these disparate aspects and keeping your mind focused in the middle path, then that creates the right conditions for the momentum to happen, for the Chariot to be able to move forward. So the Justice card is a card that in its reflection says that you should not reject anything. You're not about saying no to one thing in favor of another, but rather of maintaining this middle path. You don't attach to anything, but you accept everything in its right proportions, and that this is what allows you to have the momentum to move forward. In the first series of cards, you saw the process of entering the temple that begins with the magician and the high priestess the empress, the emperor. And in those, in the first part, you're taking steps into the temple, and then you're moving towards the inner side, and then towards the outer side, into one extreme, and then into the other extreme, and then coming back into the center in order to move up to the Holy of Holies. In this path, in this period of your work, you're not having this variation from inner to outer and from outer to inner, backwards and forwards. Instead, there isn't that kind of wandering or wavering. What you have is the focus of the internal balance that you've now achieved that lets you walk straight through the center. It is a card of not choosing, a card of not rejecting, but of not making any definitive suggestion or connection towards one side against the other. So this is a card of balancing yourself. And so it's a card also of responsibility, because what it says is that if you've gotten to where you can now be centered within yourself, and that's what this card is suggesting, then you have to take responsibility for judging yourself, for adjusting yourself, and for balancing yourself. There's no external force that should be necessary. There's no force of karma that should be necessary. One of the points of the mystic's path is to evade being stuck out of control in these cycles of karma, of cause and effect. And really, we can't change, natural disasters from happening, and we can't change even other people from acting in certain ways. But the things we can change are all within ourselves. We can change how we act. And when you're in the Justice card, it's about the responsibility of acting with that responsibility for yourself, of saying you can change yourself. You can create your own momentum, so you're not dependent on external factors creating the momentum for you. And you can balance these factors in your life in such a way that it regulates and maintains your momentum, instead of you being stuck or being trapped because of your inability to react to these external focuses. So the idea here is you take responsibility for yourself, and in so doing, you end up being the generator of your own energy. You don't need a crisis moment. Most people are afraid of crises. They sound like a very bad thing. In spirituality, a crisis is often something that's necessary. It's something that shakes you up so that it breaks some of your ideas and some of your concepts and lets you evolve. It lets you move into new ways of seeing things, new ways of thinking, and spiritual growth. Somebody who has no problems, who has no crises, maybe not no problems, but who has nothing that is upsetting their current status quo, isn't going to have much opportunity to move, right? And somebody who is at a certain level that needs external crises, whether created by events, by the universe, or whether created by the context of their spiritual practice, created by their guru, to push them forward. The Justice card reveals this secret that once you are at a level of sufficient balance, then you can create your own momentum without having to wait for this crisis to come from the outside. Now it's time to take responsibility for yourself and generate that momentum without having to wait until you're dragged kicking and screaming into it. You have to be your own judge and your own adjustment.